Okay, this is the daf for April 19th, Shabbat, 2025. Please don't watch this on Shabbat. Watch it before or after Yom Tov, but not on Shabbat. Okay, we're in Sanhedrin. Sorry, not Sanhedrin. Oh my gosh. It's 2:13 in the morning. Let me see. We're in Makkot, daf 11. Can't stop, won't stop. All right, here we go. So at the end of 10, it said, Rabbi Chama Bar Hanina says, for what reason was the portion discussing murderers stated? And now we're in daf 11. It says with harsh language. So discussing murderers stated with harsh language, as it is written, and the Lord spoke, V'yidaber, to Joshua, saying, speak, daber, to the children of Israel, saying, assign you the cities of refuge, which I spoke, dibarti, to you by means of Moses, Joshua 20, verses 1 and 2. So why does the Torah repeatedly employ a term Dibbur, connoting harsh speech, as opposed to the term Amira, connoting neutral speech, as it is due to the fact that the cities of refuge are a mitzvah of the Torah, and therefore they warrant emphasis? The Gemara asks, is that to say that all instances of speaking Dibbur indicate harsh language? The Gemara answers, yes, as it is written with regard to Joseph's brothers, quote, the man, the Lord of the land, spoke Dibbur harshly to us, Genesis 42:30. The Gemara asks, but isn't it taught in a Braita with regard to the verse, then they who feared the Lord spoke, nidberu, with one another, Malachi 3:16, that the term they spoke is nothing other than a term of gentleness, and likewise the same is true of the verse which states, he subdues, or yadber, people under us. Psalms 47, verse 4, meaning that God will calmly and gently conduct the nations under the influence of the Jewish people. The Gemara answers, the meaning of diber is discrete, and the meaning of yadber is discrete. There is a difference between the two conjugations of the same root. The Gemara provides a mnemonic for the disputes involving Rabbi Yehuda that follow. Rabbis, Mehemni, that is the dispute with Rabbi Nehemiah, and the dispute with regard to Torah scrolls sewn with threads of flax. So V'sofer, that's the other one. Okay. So the Gemara resumes the discussion of the harsh language employed in the portion discussing murderers in the book of Joshua. So Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis, meaning the majority, disagree with regard to this matter. One says harsh language was employed because Joshua delayed fulfillment of the mitzvah designating cities of refuge. And one says it is because the cities of refuge are a mitzvah, the Torah, and therefore they warrant emphasis. The Gemara cites an additional dispute with regard to the portion of the cities of refuge in the book of Joshua. It is written, and Joshua wrote these matters in the scroll of the Torah of God. Joshua 24:26. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nehemiah disagree with regard to this matter. One says the reference is to the final 8 verses in the Torah that record the death of Moses and were recorded by Joshua in the scroll of the Torah, in addition to the rest of the Torah that was written by Moses. See Bavli 15a. And one says the reference is to the portion of the cities of refuge that appears in the book of Joshua. So the Gemara discusses these two opinions. Granted, according to one who says that the reference is to the final 8 verses in the Torah, that is the reason that it is written, and Joshua wrote these matters in the scroll of the Torah of God, as he wrote those verses, and they were included in the Torah. But according to one who says that the reference is to the portion of the cities of refuge in the book of Joshua, what is the meaning of the phrase, quote, in the scroll of the Torah of God? They appear in the book of Joshua, not in the Torah. The Gemara answers, this is what the verse is saying, and Joshua wrote in this book these matters that are also written in the scroll of the Torah of God. The Gemara proceeds to cite another dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and one of the sages, in which it is not clear in which opinion is attributable to which sage. So in the case of a Torah scroll, and that's a note from the editors, in the case of a Torah scroll where one sewed its sheets with linen threads, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir disagree with regard to this matter. One says the Torah scroll is fit for use, and one says the Torah scroll is unfit, or pasul. The Gemara elaborates. According to the one who says that the Torah scroll is unfit for use, the reason is as it is written with regard to phylacteries, or tefillin, quote, and it shall be for you a sign on your hand and a memorial between your eyes, in order that the Torah of God shall be in your mouth. Exodus 13, verse 9. And in this verse, the entire Torah is juxtaposed and likened to tefillin, just as with regard to tefillin, there is a halacha transmitted to Moses from Sinai to sew them with sinews. So too, with regard to all sheets of the Torah scroll, there is a requirement to sew them with sinews. And the other sage holds, when the Torah scroll is juxtaposed and likened to Tefillin, it is only with regard to the principle that the sheets of the Torah scroll may be prepared only from a species of animal that is permitted in your mouth, that is permitted for a Jew to eat. But with regard to its other halachot, it is not juxtaposed and likened to phylacteries. Rav said, I saw that the phylacteries, the tefillin of the house of my uncle, Rabbi Chia, were sewn with linen, but the halacha is not in accordance with his opinion. Phylacteries may be sewn only with sinews. Now we're at the Mishnah. The Mishnah says the Torah states, this is an introduction to it. The Torah states that an unintentional murderer is required to remain in the city of refuge to which he fled until the death of the high priest, and the Mishnah elaborates with regard to the high priest who were appointed in several different manners. So one anointed with the anointing oil, which was the method through which high priests were consecrated until the oil was sequestered toward the end of the first temple period, and one consecrated by donning multiple garments, the 8 vestments unique to the high priest, which was the practice during the second temple period, and one who received a temporary appointment due to the unfitness of the serving high priest, who departed from his anointment with the restoration of the serving high priest to active service. Their deaths facilitate the return of the murderer from the city of refuge to his home. So Rabbi Yehuda says, even the death of a priest anointed for war to address the soldiers, Deuteronomy 20, verses 1 through 7, facilitates the return of the murderer. The Mishnah continues, therefore the mothers of high priests would provide those exiled to cities of refuge with sustenance and garments so that they would not pray that their sons would die. The more comfortable their lives in the city of refuge, the less urgency they would feel to leave, and the less likely it would be that they would pray for the death of the high priest. So the Gemara asks, from where are these matters that the death of these high priests facilitates the return of the murderer derived? Rav Kahana said that they are derived from a verse, as the verse states, and he shall dwell there until the death of the high priest, who was anointed with the sacred oil. Numbers 35:25. And it is written, for in his city of refuge he shall dwell until the death of the high priest. Numbers 35:28. And it is written, and it is written, quote, and after the death of the high priest, the murderer shall return to his ancestral land. So Numbers 25:28. The 3 mentions of the death of the high priest correspond to the 3 types of high priests enumerated by the first Tana in the Mishnah. One anointed with oil, one consecrated by donning the 8 vestments, and one who is relieved of his position. And Rabbi Yehuda holds that another verse is written, quote, and you shall take no ransom for him that fled to the city of refuge, to return and dwell in the land until the death of the priest. Numbers 35:32, from which it is derived that the death of the priest anointed for war also facilitates the return of the murderer. And the other Tana says, from the fact that high priest is not written in that verse, it is clear that the reference is not to an additional type of high priest. Rather, the reference is to one of those high priests mentioned in the preceding verses. The Mishnah teaches, therefore the mothers of the high priest would provide those exiled to cities of refuge with sustenance and garments, so that they would not pray that their sons will die. The Gemara asks, the reason that the high priest will not die is that they do not pray. The reason that the high priest will not die is that they do not pray, but if they prayed for the death of the high priest, he would die. That's a question. I'm sorry. Let me read it so it's more like a question. The Gemara asks, the reason that the high priest will not die is that they do not pray, but if they prayed for the death of the high priest, would he die? Okay, but isn't it written, as the wandering sparrow, as the flying sparrow, so a curse that is baseless shall come home. Proverbs 26 verse 2. Why does the Mishnah express concern over a baseless curse? A certain elder said to him, I heard in the lecture delivered by Rava that it is not a baseless curse, as the high priest shared the blame for the unintentional murders performed by these people, as they should have pleaded for mercy for their generation, that no murder should transpire even unintentionally, and they did not plead. Due to their share in the blame, prayers for their death could be effective. And some teach a variant reading in the Mishnah, therefore the mothers of the high priest would provide those exiled to cities of refuge with sustenance and garments, so that those exiled would pray that their sons will not die. The Gemara infers the reason that the high priest will not die is that they pray, but if they did not pray for the high priest not to die, would the high priest die? What would the high priest have done to prevent unintentional murder? Here in Babylonia, we say an adage to describe a situation of that sort. Tovia sinned, and Zigug is flogged. Tovia violated a prohibition, and Zigug came as a single witness to testify against him. Since the testimony of a single witness is not valid in court, he is flogged for defaming Tovia. The sinner is punished, and the person who sought to testify against him is flogged. This became a colloquialism for a situation where one is punished for the sin of another. So there in Eretz Yisrael, they say a different adage with the same application. Shechem married a woman, and Mavgai circumcised himself. This is based on the episode of the abduction of Dinah in the city of Shechem, Genesis 34, where Shechem compelled all the male residents of the city to undergo circumcision so that he could marry Dinah. Shechem married Dinah, while the rest of the males suffered the pain of circumcision and received no benefit. A certain elder said to him, I heard in the lecture delivered by Rabbah that the high priests share the blame, as they should have pleaded for mercy for their generation. They did not plead. Consequently, they required the exiles to pray on their own behalf. The Gemara illustrates the concept of the responsibility held by the spiritual leadership. This is like in this incident where a certain man was eaten by a lion at a distance of 3 parasangs from a place of residence of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. And Elijah the prophet did not speak with him for 3 days because of his failure to pray that an incident of this kind would not transpire in his place of residence. So apropos curses that are realized, Rav Yehuda says that Rav says, with regard to the curse of a sage, even if it is baseless, that is based on a mistaken premise, it nevertheless comes to fruition and affects the objects of the curse. From where do we derive this? It is derived from the incident involving Achitophel. When David dug the drain pipes in preparation for the building of the temple, the waters of the depths rose and sought to inundate the world. David said, what is the halacha? Is it permitted to write the sacred name on an earthenware shard and throw it into the depths so that the water will subside and stand in its place? There was no one who said anything to him. David said, anyone who knows the answer to this matter and does not say it shall be strangled. When Achitophel raised an a fortiori inference on his own and said, and if in order to make peace between a man and his wife in a case of a sota, when the husband suspects his wife of having committed adultery, the Torah says, my name that was written in sanctity shall be erased on the water. Then, in order to establish peace for the whole world in its entirety, is it not all the more so permitted? Achitophel said to David, it is permitted. David wrote the sacred name on the earthenware shard and cast it in the depths, and the water in the depths subsided and stood in its place. So, and even so, it is written that during the rebellion of Absalom, quote, and Achitophel saw that his counsel was not taken, and he saddled his donkey. He arose and went to his house, to his town, and he commanded his household and strangled himself. 2 Samuel 17:23. Although David stipulated that his curse would take effect only if one who knows the answer fails to share it with him, and Achitophel did not fail to share it with him, the curse was realized. The Gemara cites a similar statement. Rabbi Abahu says, with regard to the curse of a sage, even if it is stated conditionally, it comes to realization. From where do we derive this? It is derived from an incident involving Eli, the high priest, as Eli said to Samuel, after the latter had received a prophetic vision with regard to Eli, that his sons do not follow his path. Therefore, it says, quote, therefore may God do to you, and more so, if you hide any manner from me of all of the manners that he spoke unto you. 1 Samuel 3:17. And even though it is written immediately thereafter, Samuel told him all the matters and did not hide from him, 1 Samuel 3:18, it is written at the time of Samuel's death, quote, and his sons did not follow in his ways, 1 Samuel 8, verse 3, indicating that God did to Samuel as he prophesied with regard to Eli, and his own sons did not follow his path. Despite the fact that Eli stated the curse conditionally, Samuel was affected by the curse. So apropos declarations that take effect even if they were stated conditionally and the condition was not fulfilled, Rav Yehuda says that Rav says ostracism that was declared conditionally requires nullification even though the condition was not fulfilled. From where do we derive this? It is derived from Yehuda, as it is written with regard to his request that his father allow the brothers to take Benjamin to Egypt. Quote, if I do not bring him to you, etc., I would have sinned to you for all days. Genesis 43, verse 9. That is, I will remain ostracized as a sinner. And Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani says that Rabbi Yonatan says, what is the meaning of that which is written? Let Ruvain live and not die. Deuteronomy 33, verse 6. Followed followed immediately by the verse, quote, "in this for Judah," Deuteronomy 33, verse 7. Why was the blessing of Judah linked to that of Reuven? Throughout those 40 years that the children of Israel were in the wilderness, Judah's bones were rattling in the coffin, detached from one another, because the ostracism that he declared upon himself remained in effect, until Moses stood and entreated God to have mercy upon him. And Moses said before him, "Master of the universe, who caused Reuven to confess his sin with Bilhah? It was Judah. Judah's confession to his sin with Tamar led Reuven to confess to his own sin." Moses continued, "And this is for Judah. Hear God, the voice of Judah." Deuteronomy 33, verse 7. At that point, his limbs entered their designated place, Lashafa, and no longer rattled, but the heavenly court would not allow him to enter the heavenly academy. Moses continued, quote, "and bring him to his people," Deuteronomy 33, verse 7, "so that he may join the other righteous people in heaven." That request was also granted, but Judah did not know how to engage in the give and take of halacha with the sages in the heavenly academy. Moses continued, quote, "his hand shall contend for him," Deuteronomy 33, verse 7. That request was also granted, but Judah did not know how to resolve any difficulty raised to reject his opinion until Moses prayed, quote, "and you shall be a help against his adversaries," Deuteronomy 33, verse 7. The Mishnah enumerates those high priests whose death facilitates the return of unintentional murderers to their homes from the city of refuge to which they fled. A dilemma was raised before the sages. It is only with the death of all the high priests enumerated in the Mishnah that the unintentional murderer returns, or perhaps it is even with the death of one of them that he returns. The Gemara suggests, Tashema, come and hear a resolution to the dilemma from the succeeding Mishnah. If the verdict of a murderer was decided at a time when there was no one filling the position of high priest, he never leaves the city of refuge. And if it is so that the death of any of those listed in the Mishnah facilitates his return, let him return with the death of one of these other high priests, the one who was sanctified by donning the 8 vestments, or a priest who was relieved of his position. The Gemara rejects the proof. The Mishnah is referring to a case where there were no high priest when the verdict was decided. Okay, now we're back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, if after the unintentional murderer's verdict was decided, he was sentenced to exile, the high priest died, he is not exiled, as the death of the high priest exempts him from exile. If it was before his verdict was decided that the high priest died and they appointed another in his place, and thereafter his verdict was decided, he returns from exile with the death of the second high priest. If the verdict of the murderer was decided at a time when there was no high priest, and likewise in the cases of one who unintentionally killed a high priest, and in the case of a high priest who killed unintentionally, the unintentional murderer never leaves the city of refuge. And one who is exiled may not leave the city at all, either for testimony relating to a mitzvah, or for testimony relating to monetary matters, or for testimony relating to capital matters. And even if the Jewish people require his services, and even if he is the general of the army of Israel, like Yoav ben Zeruiah, he never leaves the city of refuge, as it is stated, quote, "and the congregation shall restore him to his city of refuge that he fled there." Numbers 35:25. From which it is derived, there shall be his dwelling, there shall be his death, there shall be his burial. So the Mishnah continues, just as an unintentional murderer is admitted to the city of refuge, so he is admitted to its outskirts located within the Sabbath boundary. Once he entered the outskirts of the city, the blood redeemer may not kill him. In a case where a murderer emerged beyond the Sabbath boundary of the city of refuge, and the blood avenger found him there, Rabbi Yoshi Hagalili says, it is a mitzvah for the blood redeemer to kill him, and it is optional for every other person to do so. Rabbi Akiva says, it is optional for the blood redeemer, and every other person is liable for killing him. Okay, the Gemara says, back to the Gemara. The Mishnah teaches, if after the unintentional murderer's verdict was decided and he was sentenced to exile, the high priest died, the unintentional murderer is not exiled. The Gemara asks, what is the reason for this? Abaye says, it is derived from an a fortiori inference. If one who was already exiled now emerges with the death of this high priest with regard to one who was not yet exiled, is it not right that he should not be exiled? Gemara rejects this reasoning, and perhaps with regard to this one who was already exiled, his sin was atoned for by his exile, and therefore the death of the high priest facilitates his return. But that one, who was not yet exiled, no, his sin was not atoned for, and the death of the high priest should not prevent his exile. The Gemara rebuts, is it his exile that atones for his sin? Is it the death of the high priest that atones for his sin, and the high priest died? Okay. The Mishnah teaches, If it was before his verdict was decided that the high priest died and they appointed another in his place, and thereafter his verdict was decided, he returns with the death of the second high priest. The Gemara asked, from where are these matters derived? Rav Kahana said that they are derived from a verse, as the verse states, and he shall dwell there until the death of the high priest, whom he anointed with the sacred oil. Numbers 35:25. Now is it the unintentional murderer who anoints the high priest? Rather, the reference is to that high priest who was anointed during his days after he committed the unintentional murder. The Gemara asked, why is his return home dependent on the death of the second high priest? Earlier, in 11a, the Gemara explained that the high priest bears a share of the responsibility for unintentional murderers, as he should have pleaded for mercy for his generation, and he did not do so. In this case, as the high priest in question was appointed only after the murder transpired, what could he have done to prevent the unintentional murder? The Gemara answers, he should have pleaded for mercy that the verdict of the unintentional murderer should be decided by the court favorably, so that he would not be sentenced to exile, and he did not plead. Abaye said, we have a tradition that with regard to an unintentional murderer whose verdict was decided and who was sentenced to exile and he died before he was exiled to the city of refuge, one transports his bones to the city of refuge and buries him there, as it is written, quote, to return and dwell in the land until the death of the priest. Numbers 35:32. And what is the dwelling that is in the land? You must say that it is referring to his burial. A sage taught, if an unintentional murderer died in a city of refuge before the high priest died, one transports his bones to the graves of his ancestors after the high priest dies. As it is written, the murderer shall return to his ancestral land. Numbers 35:28. What is the dwelling that is taking place in his ancestral land? You must say it is his burial. So the Gemara cites a dispute with regard to a case where the murderer's verdict was decided. He was sentenced to exile, and the high priest filling the position at the time was deemed the son of a divorced woman or the son of a chalutza. And the high priest was thereby disqualified from the priesthood. Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Yitzchak Napacha disagree with regard to this matter. One says the priesthood died, that is, it is as though the high priest died, and all exiles return home from the city of refuge. And the other one says the priesthood is voided, that is, it is as though there was no high priest filling the position during that period, and therefore the exiles may never leave the city of refuge. The Gemara suggests, let us say that these Amoraim, so meaning guys, the rabbis in the Gemara, Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Yitzchak Napacha, disagree with regard to the issue that is subject to the dispute between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua, as we learned in a Mishnah, Taramut 8:1. If a priest was standing and sacrificing offerings upon the altar, and it became known that he was the son of a divorced woman or the son of a chalutza, and he was disqualified from the temple service, Rabbi Eliezer says all offerings that he sacrificed up to that point are not valid, as it is apparent that he is not and never was fit for the temple service, and Rabbi Yehoshua deems all offerings that he already sacrificed as valid. The Gemara explains, let us say that one who says here that the priesthood died holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua. He holds that the high priest is disqualified only from the time of the discovery that he is disqualified from the priesthood and forward. Well, any service performed previous to that discovery is valid. The discovery that he is disqualified from the priesthood is like the high priest's death, but his priesthood is not invalidated retroactively. And the one who says that the priesthood is voided holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, and since his priesthood is voided retroactively, there was no high priest filling the position when he was sentenced. So that is the end of Daf 11. So thanks for watching.